Welcome, dear listener, to a world that does not exist, and yet somehow has always existed. You are about to enter the village of Glukhovo, which is not a real village, but it sits on the bank of a river that is very real in the imagination of anyone who has ever stood by dark water and wondered what lurks beneath. The river is called Smaragdina, a name that means emerald, though its waters are black as a raven's eye and twice as mocking. This is a story about love, but not the kind of love you find in greeting cards or romantic comedies. This is the kind of love that grows like a burdock, stubborn, prickly, and impossible to uproot. The kind that survives swamps, sarcastic owls, and a dragon who has been bored for 1,000 years. Now, before we begin, let me explain a few things, because this is a Russian story, and Russian stories do not always play by the rules you might expect. The Slavic Folklore Dictionary. You will encounter creatures in this tale that may be unfamiliar to you. They are not monsters from Western fairy tales. They are ours, Slavic, ancient, and deeply opinionated. Let me introduce you. Rusalki. Rusalki. These are not mermaids. Do not make that mistake. Western mermaids sing about love and brush their hair with pretty combs. Rusalki are drowned maidens who never quite accepted their fate. They have green hair, eyes like the bottom of a well, and a singing voice that will make you forget your own name. They do not rescue drowning sailors. They create them. In this story, they steal Anushka not because they are evil, but because they are lonely. And lonely people, as we all know, make terrible decisions. Vodyanoi. Vodyanoi. The water spirit. Imagine your most annoying uncle, but he lives at the bottom of a lake, has a beard of duckweed, and speaks with a voice that sounds like rocks being shaken in a bucket. The Vodyanoi is not evil, he is simply inconvenient. He will help you, but only if you free him from a stone prison first. He will give you a magic whistle, but he will also complain about the weather. He is, in many ways, the most relatable creature in this story. Leshy. Leshy. The forest spirit. He looks like an old man made of bark and leaves, with eyes like glowing coals and a beard of creeping ivy. He does not appreciate cleverness. He appreciates cunning. He plays games with travelers, and if you lose, you become a tree. Not metaphorically, literally, every Tuesday. He has a sense of humor, but it is the humor of someone who has been alone in the woods for 600 years and has forgotten how to be funny. Baba Yaga. Baba Yaga. Ah, everyone knows Baba Yaga, or thinks they do. She is not a wicked witch, she is a complicated witch. She lives in a hut that stands on chicken legs. Yes, real chicken legs, muscular ones, like a bird that has been working out. She flies in a mortar, uses a pestle as a paddle, and will either help you or eat you, depending on whether you remembered to bring bread. In this story, she is a life coach with a very long memory and a very short temper. Also, she has a blog now. It is surprisingly popular. Kikimoras. Kikimoras. Swamp spirits. They are the world's oldest improv troupe, and they have never met a performance they could not ruin. They mimic voices, your mother's, your lover's, the voice of God Himself, if they think it will make you turn around. They are not dangerous in a physical sense. They are dangerous in a psychological sense. They will make you doubt everything you know, and then they will laugh about it. Gribi govorani, gribi govoruni. Talking mushrooms. Yes, mushrooms that speak. They are the moral gatekeepers of the forest. They ask riddles that are not riddles. They are ethical dilemmas disguised as small talk. They judge you. They will not eat you, but they will make you question your life choices. And they sing. Badly. The Dragon. In Western stories, dragons hoard gold and breathe fire. This dragon has 3 heads, one like a ram, one like a serpent, and one disturbingly human. He hoards not gold, but boredom. He has been alive for 1,000 years, and he has seen everything, eaten everything, and is deeply unimpressed by everything. He is not the villain of this story. He is the audience. And, like any audience, he is difficult to please. And then there is the river, the Smaragdina. This river is not just a river, it is a character. It breathes. It remembers. It has swallowed the sighs of drowned maidens, the whispers of watergrass, and the occasional belch of a sleepy vodyanoi. It will take your love, and it will give it back, but only if you ask nicely. A word about the style. This story is told in the manner of old Russian folklore, the byliny, the epic tales sung by wandering bards. But it is also told with the irony of a modern novelist who knows that happy endings are not always happy, and that love is not a prize you win, but a soup you keep stirring. You will find echoes of Gogol's absurdity, Pasternak's poetry, and Bulgakov's sardonic wit. You will find talking animals, philosophical mushrooms, and a dragon who becomes a life coach. You will find a hero who does not wield a sword, but a hatchet, and a very old, very tired hatchet at that. You will also find yourself laughing. And then, perhaps, you will find yourself thinking. And now, dear listener, the story begins. Not at the beginning, because in Slavic tales the beginning is never quite the beginning. It begins by the river, on a morning that smelled of damp linen and impending disaster. It begins with a shirt that was not just a shirt. Oh, and one more thing. In this story, the future is a smartphone, the past is a handkerchief, and the present is a soup made from an axe. If that makes sense to you, you are ready. If it does not, well, that is the point. Let us begin. The Slavic Dragon's Tapestry of Love. Chapter 1. Of the Shirt That Was Not Merely a Shirt. The river Smaragdina did not flow, it breathed, and its breath was black, oily as tar, the very kind in which stars bathe by night to emerge at dawn cold and estranged. Along its banks, beneath a sky the color of unwashed linen, the huts of Glukhovo huddled together, not houses, but stooped old women gathered for a wake, unable to decide whom to mourn. In this world, where even the air smelled of sour cabbage and the eternal expectancy of calamity, the love of Anushka and Ivan had not bloomed like a rose. It had grown like a burdock, tenacious, shameless, with thorns that pierce the heart when one least expects it. He was a blacksmith's son, broad-shouldered, slow of speech, with eyes the color of burnt honey. She was a weaver's daughter, her tongue as sharp as a shuttle, her laughter ringing, and her braids so thick that when she tossed her head, the very air about her seemed to spin as if drunk. That morning, and it was a damp, malevolent morning, reeking of rotting grass, Anushka went down to the river with a basket of linen. Her grandmother, the village wise woman, who had but one tooth but the memory of 3 lifetimes, warned her hoarsely, "Do not go to the bend where the willows weep, daughter. There the water is too quiet, and silence listens." Anushka, young and immortal in her insolence, merely waved her hand. "Grandmother, the water listens only to those who fear it, and I am not afraid." She knelt upon the flat stone where generations of Glukhovo women had beaten the sin out of their linen until the fabric itself began to groan. In her hands she held Ivan's shirt, the very one with the embroidered collar she had stitched all winter, while wolves howled beyond the window and an owl hooted in the chimney. The soap root foamed, the water eddied, and the sun, a pale coin lodged in the clouds, warmed not so much the earth as its own pride. And then the willows began to sing. It was no bird song. It was a chorus of wet voices, as if the reeds themselves had learned to speak, whispering of all they had witnessed in the depths. Anushka looked up, and she saw them. 3 pale figures, half women, half fish, their hair like green moss, their eyes like the bottom of a well. The Rusalki sat upon a log that had not been there a moment before, combing their tresses with fish bones. Not with combs, with bones. "A pretty shirt," said the first, her voice like the crack of ice. "But it will soon be wet." "Leave me be," said Anushka, though her hands trembled and a cold knot turned in her chest. "I have done nothing to you." "You have breathed," said the second, and in her voice there was such longing that Anushka's eyes stung. "That is enough." They did not drag her by force. That would have been too vulgar. They simply invited her, with a melody that tugged at the place behind her navel, where the soul is tethered to the body by a thread as fine as spider silk. Anushka rose. Her feet moved of their own accord. Her mouth opened, but no sound escaped. The last thing she saw was the magpie that had nested in the birch above the cliff. It flapped its wings and cawed, but its warning was swallowed by the song, thick as molasses. And the river closed over her head with a soft, satisfied gurgle, like a samovar into which one has thrown a lump of ice. Chapter 2. Of the water sprite who was wedged between stones like a cork. Ivan found the shirt at dusk. It lay on the bank like a shed skin, the embroidery already bleached, as if the river had drunk all its color, leaving only a pale ghost of what had been. He did not weep. Weeping is for men who have not forged their own plowshares. Instead, he tucked his grandfather's hatchet into his belt, filled a pouch with salt, broke off a crust of rye bread, and stepped into the forest that stood like a wall along the Smaragdina. The forest after sunset was unfriendly. The trees leaned towards one another like gossips, their branches scratching at his shoulders. The path twisted and doubled back, as though the very earth had decided to play hide-and-seek. But Ivan had grown up here. He knew that when the forest is silent, it is not silence. It is someone listening very intently. By midnight he reached the Lake of the Forgotten, a stagnant basin ringed by gray boulders that looked like the teeth of a dead giant. In the middle of the lake, half submerged, lay a great stone, and between it and another, wedged like a cork in a bottle, sat the Vodyanoi himself. He was nothing like the elegant spirit of the ballads. He was a fat old man with a beard of duckweed, a lopsided crown of water lilies on his head, and an expression that said, clearer than words, "Here comes another one." His eyes were the color of swamp mud, and when he spoke, his voice gurgled as if his throat were full of pebbles. "You came," he croaked. "I knew you would. The magpie told me." Ivan raised his hatchet. "Where is Anushka?" "Patience, hammer boy. She is alive, if you can call life a coral cage under the dragon's throne. But it is I who need freeing. That three-headed lout jammed me between these stones because I dared to help a mortal. I broke the compact, he says, the ancient agreement between water and fire, as if fire ever kept a promise." Ivan studied the stone. It was enormous, but a hair-thin crack ran down its face. "And what do I get if I move it?" The Vodyanoi grinned, and his teeth gleamed, polished by river pearls. "I'll give you a bone whistle. Blow it, and the river spirits will hear. And I'll tell you the only path to the dragon's lair, not through the swamp, where the kikimoras will tickle you to death, but through the birch grove, where the old willows hold counsel. But first, say the words." He recited a charm in a tongue older than the Slavs themselves, a guttural, moist whisper that made Ivan's spine prickle. Ivan repeated it. The air thickened, grew viscous as jelly. He struck the stone with his hatchet, not with force, but in the rhythm of the words. The stone groaned, sighed, and split clean in two, neat and true. The Vodyanoi tumbled out like a wet sack, sputtering with gratitude. "Good lad. Here, take the whistle. 1 blow for fair water, 2 for foul, 3 for the drowned. And listen to the willows. They bear no love for dragons, but they love riddles more than honey." He pressed into Ivan's hand a bone whistle carved with runes, then dissolved into the lake, leaving only rings on the water and the smell of silt and ancient grievance. Chapter 3. Of Owls That Know More Than They Ought. The birch grove was not merely a grove. It was a cathedral of bark and shadow. The trees grew in concentric circles, and at the center stood 3 willows so ancient that their trunks had split into question marks. They were not trees, they were oracles, the kind that exact a price for every prophecy and brook no debtors. Ivan stepped onto the moss, and his boots sank to the ankle. The willows rustled without wind, and from their branches descended a gray shape, an owl with eyes like polished amber. But this was no ordinary owl. She wore a tiny wreath of willow herb on her head, and she regarded Ivan with the haughty condescension of a provincial governess eyeing a peasant who has trodden on her train. "So," said the owl, in a voice unmistakably feminine, sharp and dry. "You are the blacksmith who lost his bride. Baba Yaga sent me. She said you would be tall and stupid. She was half right." Ivan frowned. "I am not stupid. I simply hold my tongue when there is nothing to say." "Oh, charming! A man of few words. That will serve you well when the dragon asks you 3 questions. But first, you must pass me. I am the keeper of the crossing, and I have 3 questions of my own." "Ask," said Ivan, instinctively clutching his pouch of salt. The owl hopped to a lower branch and fixed him with one eye. "First, what is heavier, a stone of grief or a feather of joy?" Ivan thought of Anushka's laughter, then of her empty loom. He remembered how quiet the hut had become the morning she left. "Joy is heavier," he said, "because when it is gone, you carry the weight of its absence." The owl tilted her head. "Passable. Second, what is the one thing a dragon cannot eat?" "His own pride," said Ivan, without a moment's hesitation. The owl gave a dry, rasping snort, like a floorboard creaking. "You've read your fairy tales. Third, if you could become a beast for one night, what would you choose, and why?" Ivan looked at the owl, at the willows, at the sky beginning to pale in the east. "A mouse," he said. "A mouse can squeeze through any crack, and I have a feeling the dragon's lair has more cracks than an old chest." The owl fluffed her feathers, and in that gesture there was something almost human, almost approving. "You are not hopeless. I will go with you, not as a pet, but as a guide. And I will bring the hare and the mouse. They owe me old favors. But know this, Ivan, the road ahead is paved with lies, riddles, and the bones of those who trusted the 3rd head of the dragon. Keep your salt handy, your wits sharper, and your heart as cold as the riverbed, because the only thing worse than a Rusalka's song is a dragon's kindness." She flew down and settled on his shoulder, her talons pricking through his homespun sleeve. "Now walk westward towards the bog, and when you see the mushrooms that speak, do not answer them until they have finished their chorus. Otherwise, they will sing you into madness." Ivan walked. The owl was silent for a while, then added, as if to herself, "And by the way, your fly is undone." Chapter 4. Of the hut that danced on foul legs, and of a witch who preferred jam to gold. The path to Baba Yaga's dwelling was not so much a path as a suggestion, a muddy smear between 2 mossy hummocks, punctuated by the occasional mushroom that squinted at Ivan with knowing malevolence. The owl on his shoulder, whom he had taken to calling Sova, for she flatly refused to give her true name, claiming that names were like pickled cucumbers, once given, they could never be taken back, maintained a running commentary that oscillated between topographical instruction and outright character assassination. "Turn left at the crooked birch," she hooted. "No, your other left. Were you raised by wolves? Actually, wolves have superior navigation skills. At least they mark their trails with something other than sheer bewilderment." Ivan bit his tongue.
He had learned, in the space of 2 hours, that arguing with a prophetic owl was like arguing with a millstone, pointless and likely to leave you flattened. They emerged into a clearing that smelled of smoke, dried herbs, and something distinctly grandmotherly, an odor of beets, mothballs, and ancient secrets. And there it stood, the legendary hut, teetering on 2 absurdly muscular chicken legs, its roof thatched with rye straw and its windows grinning like blackened eye sockets. It was spinning slowly, as if deliberating whether to face Ivan or to present him with its backside, which was adorned with a hand-painted sign that read, "No soliciting. Violators will be converted into amphibians." Ivan stepped forward, cleared his throat, and bellowed the traditional formula, the one his own grandmother had taught him, the very words that compelled the hut to obey. "Turn your back to the forest, your front to me, for I come with a question and a crust of bread." The hut creaked, wobbled, and rotated with the reluctant groan of an old woman rising from her armchair after a particularly heavy dinner. The door swung open, revealing a stairway of bones, not human, as Ivan noted with some relief, but predominantly poultry. Chicken bones, to be precise. The irony was not lost on him. Baba Yaga herself appeared in the doorway, leaning on a pestle that doubled as a walking stick. She was shorter than Ivan had expected, barely the height of his shoulder, with a nose that could have served as a sundial, and hair the color of unwashed wool, tufted and wild. She wore a brocade sarafan that had once been magnificent, but was now stained with beetroot soup and what appeared to be dried owl droppings. She squinted at Ivan in a way that suggested she was either severely short-sighted or chronically unimpressed. It was probably both. "So," she said, her voice like gravel rolling downhill, "the blacksmith's boy. I knew your mother. She made excellent kvass, the kind that puts hair on your chest and tears in your eyes. You, I suspect, are an acquired taste." Ivan bowed low. "Great-grandmother of the forest, I beg your aid. My betrothed—" I know. Rusalki, dragon, clean soul, yada yada." She waved a gnarled hand, dismissing his tragedy with the casual flick of a woman who had seen empires crumble and had used their ruins as firewood. "Come in, before you let all the heat out, and wipe your feet. I just swept the floor with a broom of rowan twigs, and if you track mud, I'll use that broom on you."
Inside, the hut was larger than its exterior suggested, a classic trick of witch space, where the walls bent like rubber and the ceiling soared to the height of a cathedral. Bundles of herbs hung from the rafters, St. John's wort, wormwood, fern, and a few that Ivan did not recognize, but which emitted a faint, whispering hum, as if they were reciting prayers in their sleep. On the stove, a cauldron bubbled with something that looked like porridge, but smelled like regret. In the corner, a cat with a patch over one eye sat on a spinning wheel, watching Ivan with the detached malice of a bailiff assessing a debtor. Yaga settled into her mortar. She used it as an armchair, and scrutinized him over the rim of a chipped cup. "You want to rescue your Anushka. Fine. But the dragon is not your ordinary lizard. He has 3 heads, 3 personalities, and 3 times the ego of a provincial governor. You cannot defeat him with muscle alone. You need wits, speed, and the ability to crawl through small spaces without complaining. She clapped her hands, a dry, dusty sound. From the shadows emerged 3 creatures, a hare with legs like coiled springs, a mouse with whiskers that twitched as if reading the air itself, and the owl, who had already taken a perch on the rafters and was preening with affected indifference. "These 3 will accompany you," said Yaga. "The hare will outrun any curse, the mouse will gnaw through any lock, and the owl, she is my own, so treat her with respect, or I will turn your toes into turnips and feed them to my cat." Ivan looked at the menagerie. "And what about a sword, a shield, a good solid axe?" Yaga cackled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones, like the last laugh of autumn before winter devours it. "Swords are for knights who die in the first chapter. You, my dear boy, will rely on words, old words, dark words, words that bend the world to your will like a blacksmith bends iron." She reached under her stool and produced a scroll of birch bark covered in letters that seemed to writhe like worms in wet earth. "This is the Zagovor Prokodnoi, the passing spell. Read it when you face a barrier, but be careful. Each word must be spoken with the correct breath, or it will turn back on you and knot your tongue into a pretzel. Also, I have included a recipe for mushroom stew, because you will get hungry, and hungry heroes make foolish decisions." She pressed the scroll into his hands, then shoved a small pouch of salt into his pocket. "Salt for purity, bread for hospitality, and my personal advice: never trust the 3rd head. The 1st head lies, the 2nd head bargains, but the 3rd head convinces you that you have already won, and that is the most dangerous lie of all." Ivan bowed deeply. "How can I repay you, great-grandmother?" Yaga smiled, revealing teeth that were, mercifully, still mostly her own, though one was gold, one was iron, and one appeared to be carved from a cherry pit. "When you are done, bring me a scale from the dragon's belly, the soft one, just behind the left foreleg. I need it for my arthritis cream. The rheumatism in my knee has been acting up since the Mongol invasion. Now go. The mushrooms are waiting, and they get impatient." Chapter 5. Of Talking Mushrooms and the Weight of Moral Choices. They left the hut as the sun began its reluctant crawl toward noon, though in this forest, noon was merely a paler shade of gloom, the color of watered milk, the light of a lantern burning low. Ivan, with the hare bounding ahead, the mouse riding in his collar like a furry brooch, and the owl gliding overhead, followed a trail that wound between gnarled oaks and weeping birches like a thread through the eye of a needle. Soon the trees gave way to a clearing entirely covered in mushrooms, not the humble brown buttons of the kitchen garden, but towering fungi of every hue, blood-red caps with white spots, violet gills that oozed a luminous slime, and one particularly enormous mushroom that bore a disturbing resemblance to a human ear, complete with lobes and a faintly visible tragus. As Ivan stepped into the clearing, the mushrooms began to sway. their caps tilted toward him like inquisitive heads, and they emitted a chorus of high-pitched, reedy voices, like a children's choir that had been left out in the rain too long. "A man, with a nose so grand," they sang. "He seeks a bride, but will he abide?" Ivan stopped. He remembered the owl's warning, but also Yaga's advice, do not interrupt the chorus. So he waited, arms crossed, while the mushrooms harmonized through a full 3 verses about the dangers of trusting dragons who wore waistcoats and the inadvisability of eating porridge that looked back at you. Finally, a mushroom with a particularly gnarled stem, looking like an old patriarch with a beard of mycelium, stepped forward. Mushrooms can step when they feel like it. It cleared its throat with a wet, spongy sound, like a boot being pulled out of mud. "We are the Gribby Govaruni, the talking mushrooms," it announced. "We guard this path, and we will only let you pass if you answer our moral riddle correctly. It is not a riddle of logic, but of the heart, the kind that village elders use to test young men around the fire when the vodka has worn off and the truth begins to creep in." "Ask," said Ivan. The patriarch mushroom leaned forward, its cap tilting conspiratorially. "A man finds a purse of gold on the road. He knows it belongs to a widow with 3 children. But he also knows that if he returns it, he will have no money to buy medicine for his dying mother. What should he do?" Ivan thought. He looked at the hare who twitched its nose, at the owl who blinked slowly with the patience of a stone, at the mouse who had crawled out to nibble on a crumb of bread, utterly indifferent to moral philosophy. "He should return the gold," said Ivan, "but he should ask the widow to give him a loan for the medicine and promise to work it off as a laborer. That way, honor is preserved and no one dies of pride. The widow gains a helper, the mother gains her medicine, and the man gains a clear conscience, though perhaps a sore back from all the labor." The mushrooms rustled their gills in what appeared to be astonishment. The patriarch nodded slowly, its cap bobbing like a buoy in a gentle sea. "A practical answer, not a pious one. We like that. Too many heroes give us the saintly answer, and then they choke on their own virtue halfway down the road. Proceed, blacksmith. But beware, the next challenge is not a mushroom, but a Leshy, and he does not appreciate cleverness. He appreciates cunning. There is a difference, though it is as subtle as the difference between a wolf and a dog that has not been fed in a week." The mushrooms parted, revealing a narrow tunnel of moss and fern, an earthen throat that swallowed the light and exhaled the smell of damp secrets. Ivan stepped through, the hare darting ahead to check for traps, the mouse burrowing deeper into his collar, and the owl gliding in silence, her amber eyes missing nothing. Chapter 6 of the Leshy who played dice with destiny and lost. The tunnel opened into a dense thicket where the trees grew so close together that their branches interlaced like fingers in prayer, or like the hands of conspirators sealing a dark pact. In the center sat a figure that might have been an old man, or might have been a heap of bark and leaves that had learned to mimic humanity. He had a beard of creeping ivy, eyes like glowing coals, and a whistle that he used to confuse travelers, not to harm them, but to watch them stumble and curse, which he found endlessly amusing. "So," he said, his voice a low rumble that shook the ground beneath Ivan's feet, "you have passed the gribby. That was the easy part. They are sentimental fools. Now you must play my game." He pulled out a gnarled board carved with strange symbols, a game that Ivan vaguely recognized from his grandfather's tales, the game of the path, where each move either advanced you or sent you back to the beginning, like life itself, which is nothing but a series of advances and retreats disguised as progress. "We will play 3 rounds," said Leshy. "For each round you must choose a path, left or right. If you choose correctly, you move forward. If not, you return to the start. But there is a twist. Each path has a riddle attached, and you must answer correctly to earn the right to move. Think of it as a job interview for heroes." Ivan sighed. "And if I lose?" Leshy grinned, revealing a mouth full of roots, gnarled, brown, and flecked with soil. "Then you become my forest servant for a century. Do not worry, I treat my servants well. I only turn them into birches every other Tuesday. The rest of the week they are perfectly comfortable." The first round, left path. A riddle about a river that flows uphill. Ivan recalled the Vojinoy's advice about water spirits and their tendency to invert the laws of nature for spite. He guessed that the answer was mirage. He was correct. The board clicked, and he advanced a square. The second round, right path. A riddle about a bird that builds its nest without twigs. Ivan pictured the owl, who had mentioned that she sometimes nested in hollows, not out of laziness, but out of architectural principle. He answered, "A hollow tree." Correct again. The board clicked, and he advanced further. The third round, left path again. A riddle that was not a riddle at all, but a demand. What is the one thing a dragon cannot steal? Ivan remembered the owl's test in the grove, and he gave the same answer, though he felt a twinge of repetition. His own pride. The Leshy threw back his head and laughed, a sound like an avalanche of acorns, like the collapse of 1,000 nut stores. "You are either very wise or very lucky," said Leshy, wiping a tear of sap from his eye. "Either way, I grant you passage. But I warn you, ahead lies the swamp of the Kikimoras. They will mimic the voice of your beloved. They will mimic the voice of your mother. They will mimic the voice of God if they think it will make you turn around. Do not listen. If you do, you will sink into the mud, and no magic, not even Yaga's, will pull you out." He pointed with a branch-like finger toward a hazy expanse of gray water and reeds, where the mist hung like a curtain of gauze, and the air itself seemed to hum with suppressed giggles. Ivan nodded, thanked him, and moved on, the hare now wary, the mouse trembling, and the owl unusually silent, as if she were saving her strength for the ordeal to come. Chapter 7 of the Swamp of Whispers, where voices are cheaper than air. The swamp stretched before Ivan like a gray, breathing thing, an enormous lung that inhaled mist and exhaled decay. Mist coiled between the reeds in serpentine ribbons, and the water was not water, but a thick, gelatinous broth, the color of weak tea, the consistency of half-set jelly. Each step squelched with a sound that was half suction, half sigh, the noise of the earth digesting its mistakes. "Remember," whispered the owl from her perch on a dead branch, "the kikimoras will try to unman you with voices. They are masters of mimicry. They have been practicing since before your great-grandfather was a twinkle in his grandmother's eye. They have had centuries to perfect their craft. They are, in essence, the world's oldest improv troupe, and they have never met a performance they could not ruin." Ivan nodded, tightening his grip on the salt pouch. The hare had already bounded ahead, testing the ground with its spring-loaded legs, a living plumb line for danger. The mouse, meanwhile, had taken to riding on Ivan's shoulder, its tiny nose twitching at the acrid air, its whiskers reading the atmosphere like a sailor reads the wind. They had gone perhaps 50 paces when the first voice came. "Ivan!" It was Anushka's voice, unmistakably, the lilting cadence she used when she was teasing him, the slight rasp at the end of her words from too much singing at the harvest festivals. It was warm, familiar, and utterly devastating. Ivan felt his chest constrict, as if an invisible hand had reached into his ribcage and squeezed his heart like a lemon. "Ivan, why did you leave me? The water is so cold, and I am so alone. Come closer, my love. The dragon has grown bored with me. He wants you instead. Let me show you the way." He stopped. His hand went to his hatchet. "Do not," said the owl sharply, her voice slicing through the fog like a blade. "That is not her. Look, the reeds are swaying without wind. That is not Anushka. That is the swamp trying on her face like a new hat." Ivan squinted. The reeds were indeed moving, but not in unison, not with the grace of wind. They writhed like snakes, like the hair of a drowned woman, and from between them emerged a face. It was Anushka's face, but pale as curdled milk, with eyes that were entirely black. Two voids that swallowed the light and gave nothing back. The mouth opened, and the voice came again, sweeter now, more desperate. "Ivan, I am frightened. Please, do not leave me here." Ivan reached into his pocket, pulled out a crust of bread, the bread Yaga had given him, the bread that was more than bread, and threw it at the apparition. The crust struck the face, which dissolved into a puff of marsh gas and a chorus of tittering laughter from the reeds. The laughter was high, shrill, and distinctly mocking, the sound of children who have just played a very successful prank. "Clever," said the owl. "Bread absorbs enchantment. Baba Yaga's recipe. The yeast, you see, is enchanted." but they will try again and again until you reach the other side. They have nothing else to do. They have been at this since the time of the Varangians. They pressed on. The voices multiplied. Now it was his grandmother, scolding him for not fixing the fence. The same fence he had promised to mend last autumn. The same fence that still leaned drunkenly into the garden. Now it was his dead father, urging him to turn back, to save himself, to let Anushka go. Now it was a chorus of children he had never met, singing a lullaby that made his eyes sting. A lullaby about a river that never froze, about a love that never died, about a world that had no use for heroes. The hare, who had been scampering ahead, suddenly froze. Its ears flattened, its hind legs trembled, and it let out a tiny squeak of terror. Ivan caught up and saw why. A massive, sluggish shape was emerging from the bog ahead. It was a bolotnik, a swamp dweller, cousin to the vodunoi, but less friendly and considerably more covered in algae. His head was the size of a barrel, his eyes were yellow saucers, and his teeth were the size of river stones, flat, gray, and designed for grinding. "Who walks my swamp?" boomed the bolotnik, his voice like mud bubbling over a low fire. "Who disturbs the sleep of the deep? Who dares to tread where even the reeds fear to root?" Ivan stepped forward, his hand on the bone whistle the vodunoi had given him. "I am Ivan, son of Myron, blacksmith of Glukhovo. I seek passage to the dragon's lair." "And why should I give you passage?" The bolotnik's eyes narrowed, and the water around him began to churn. "The swamp feeds on travelers. You would be a fine meal, lean, but well seasoned by fear." Ivan raised the whistle and blew once, a clear, piercing note that cut through the mist like a knife through butter. The sound was pure, ancient, and undeniable. The bolotnik recoiled as if struck by a physical blow, his massive body heaving backward. "That whistle," he hissed, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "That is Vodunoi's call. You are his chosen? You freed him from the dragon's prison?" "I did," said Ivan. "He owes me a debt, and debts, even in the swamp, are honored, unless you wish to be known as the bolotnik who broke his word." The swamp dweller considered this, his algae-coated head tilting from side to side like a confused ox. Finally, he grunted, a sound like a boulder rolling downhill. "Fine, pass, but the Kiki-Moras will still try to trick you. They do not answer to me. They answer only to their own boredom. Do not stop walking. Do not answer. And whatever you do, do not look back. Even if you hear the voice of the one you love most, crying out your name in despair, that is the moment they will strike." Ivan nodded. The bolotnik sank back into the mire with a wet, sucking sound, leaving only a ring of bubbles and the faint smell of ancient grudges. They walked for what felt like hours, or perhaps days. Time in the swamp was as fluid as the water itself. The voices became more desperate, more ingenious. They tried Anushka's voice again, but this time in a whisper of such intimate familiarity, such perfect mimicry of her breath, that Ivan's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached.
They tried the voice of his unborn child, a possibility he had never even considered, a future he had not allowed himself to imagine. They tried the voice of God, which was a particularly brazen attempt, and which made the owl snort with contempt. But Ivan walked, and did not look back, not once. Chapter 8. Of the Wolf and the Bear, who played dice with strangers. The swamp ended abruptly, as if sliced by a divine knife, or, more accurately, as if the gods had grown bored of the scenery and decided to change the channel. One moment, Ivan was ankle-deep in brown sludge. The next, his foot hit solid earth, and he found himself at the edge of a pine forest so old that the trees had forgotten their own names. They stood like sentinels, their bark scarred with runes that no one could read, their branches heavy with the weight of centuries. In the center of a clearing, two figures sat on a fallen log, playing dice with knuckle bones and arguing with the comfortable aggression of lifelong rivals. One was a massive brown bear, his fur matted with pine resin and what looked suspiciously like honey. The other was a gray wolf, lean and scarred, with eyes that glowed amber in the dim light, the color of old fire, the color of warnings. They looked up as Ivan approached. The hare, with admirable cowardice, hid behind Ivan's leg. The mouse burrowed into his collar, trembling. The owl, however, maintained her dignity and perched on a branch above, glaring down with the disdain of a duchess observing a peasant festival.
"Fresh meat," said the wolf, licking his chops with a tongue that was improbably pink and cheerful. "Fresh company," corrected the bear, in a voice that was surprisingly gentle, the voice of a creature who had once been a teddy bear and had never quite gotten over it. "We do not eat company. We just interrogate them." Ivan stopped, his hand resting on his hatchet. "State your business," said the wolf, clicking the dice impatiently. "We are the guardians of the northern pass. No one passes without answering a question. It is the law of the forest, as old as the first acorn." "What kind of question?" asked Ivan. "Two options," said the bear, folding his massive paws over his belly. "A question of strength or a question of wisdom. Choose wisely. The wrong choice will not kill you, but it will send you back to the swamp, and I suspect you have had quite enough of the swamp." Ivan considered. He was strong, blacksmith's son, after all. He had forged iron, bent steel, wrestled a runaway bull to the ground. But he had seen the bear's shoulders, which were wider than his entire hut, and the wolf's speed was evident in the way his muscles coiled beneath his fur, like serpents preparing to strike. Strength was not his advantage. "Wisdom," he said. The bear grinned, a terrifying sight, filled with teeth that could have crushed granite. "Very well. Here is the question. What is stronger, a wolf's pack or a bear's solitude?" Ivan thought. This was a trap, clearly. The wolf would say pack, and the bear would say solitude, and whichever he chose, he would offend the other. They were testing his diplomatic skills as much as his intellect. But he remembered something his grandmother had told him in the days when she still had all her teeth. "In the forest, as in the village, True strength is not in numbers or in solitude, but in the ability to ask for help when you need it, and the grace to offer it when you do not. A wolf's pack is stronger, said Ivan slowly, because even the strongest bear needs someone to scratch his back when the itch becomes unbearable. But a bear's solitude is braver, because he faces the winter alone with only his own breath for company. So the answer is that they are equal. Each is strong in its own way, and each would be lost without the other's example. The wolf and the bear stared at him. The forest held its breath. Then, slowly, they began to laugh, deep, rumbling sounds that shook the pine needles from the branches and sent a flock of startled crows into the sky. "Clever boy," said the wolf, wiping a tear from his amber eye. "You dodged a trap, a diplomat's answer. Very well, we will let you pass. But there is one more challenge ahead, the squirrel of the silver tail. She is the most difficult of all, because she does not test your wit or your strength. She tests your patience. And patience, my friend, is the rarest virtue of all." The bear stood and lumbered aside, revealing a narrow path between two massive pines, a corridor of shadow and moss that wound uphill toward a distant peak. "Go, but when you meet the squirrel, remember, she has been waiting for a good conversation for 300 years. Do not rush her, and do not mention nuts. She is very sensitive about her diet." Chapter 9. Of the Squirrel Who Asked the Only Question That Mattered. The path wound uphill through the pines, the air thinning and cooling, the scent of resin giving way to the crispness of altitude. Ivan could feel the weight of the mountain ahead. The lair of the dragon was said to be carved into the highest peak, accessible only through a hidden cleft in the rock, a crack in the world's armor. But first, he had to deal with the squirrel. She appeared on a branch directly above his head, flicking a tail that was indeed silver, not gray, not white, but true metallic silver, as if she had dipped it in moonlight and let it dry under the stars. Her fur was a rich chestnut, her eyes sharp and intelligent, and she held a hazelnut in her paws like a scepter, a symbol of her authority over all things small and nut-related. "Ho, traveler," she said, her voice a rapid chitter that somehow conveyed both impatience and amusement. "You come from the swamp, I smell it on you. And from the wolf and the bear, they let you through. Which means you passed their test, which means you are either very clever or very lucky. I suspect a bit of both. The swamp leaves a mark, the forest leaves a memory." Ivan bowed. "I am Ivan, son of Miron, blacksmith of Glukhovo. I seek passage to the dragon's lair. The squirrel of the silver tail, if you please," she interrupted, tossing the nut from paw to paw with practiced ease. "I have a name, you know, but I will not give it to you yet. Names are power. You will earn mine when you answer my question. And my question is not a riddle, it is an interrogation. Are you ready?" "Ask," said Ivan, though he was beginning to feel the weariness of too many questions, the fatigue of a man who has been tested one too many times and is beginning to suspect that the tests are the point.
The squirrel perched on a lower branch, leaning in conspiratorially, her silver tail curling around her like a shawl. Here is my question. You have been traveling for days, or perhaps weeks. Time is tricky in this forest. You have met monsters, spirits, and gods. You have been tested in your wits, your courage, and your ability to make polite conversation with fungi. Now I ask you, what is the point? Ivan blinked. The point of what? Of all of it. Of the journey, of the quest, of the love that sent you on this mad errand. What is the point of loving someone so much that you would walk through a swamp of lies, face a three-headed lizard, and bargain with a witch who probably has your grandmother's teeth in a jar? What is the point of all this suffering, all this effort, all this walking and questioning and being questioned? Ivan opened his mouth, then closed it. He thought of Anushka, her laugh, her temper, the way she would scold him for leaving his tools in the rain, and then healed his splinters with her grandmother's salve. He thought of her braids, the smell of her hair after she had been baking bread, a smell of yeast and warmth and home. He thought of the small scar on her chin from falling out of a pear tree when they were children, and the way she would always touch it when she was embarrassed. He thought of the look in her eyes that morning by the river, the one she gave him before she went to wash the linen, the one that said, "Hurry back, I will be waiting." "The point," said Ivan, and his voice was quieter now, steadier, "is that love is not a bargain. You do not love someone because they are useful, or because they save you, or because they make you feel important. You love them because they exist, because they are themselves, and because without them, the world is less vivid. Anushka is not a reward. She is not a prize to be won at the end of a quest. She is a person I choose to fight for, simply because she exists. The point is not the ending. The point is that I am here, walking, and she is there, waiting, and that is enough." The squirrel was silent for a long moment, so long that Ivan began to fear he had said the wrong thing. Then she threw her hazelnut at his head. It bounced off his forehead with a gentle thwack. "Good answer," she said, her voice softer now. "The correct answer. You have passed. I am Shchetinka, that is my name. And I will tell you a secret. The dragon's lair is not guarded by fire, as the tales say. It is guarded by boredom. The dragon has been alive for 1,000 years, and he is desperately lonely. If you can entertain him, he will grant you anything." She gave Ivan a nut, not a real one, but a golden nut carved of wood and painted with runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. "Show this to the dragon when you meet him. It is a token of my favor. It will make him curious. And curiosity, in a creature as old as he, is the closest thing to hope." Ivan thanked her, pocketed the golden nut, and continued up the path. The owl, who had been silent for a long while, finally spoke, her voice dry and contemplative. "She was right, you know, about the boredom. I have been watching this dragon for centuries. He is the most tedious creature I have ever encountered. 3 heads, and none of them have a sense of humor. His jokes are worse than his breath, and his breath is legendary." Ivan laughed, the first genuine laugh since leaving the village, the first sound of joy that had escaped his throat in what felt like a lifetime. Then perhaps I will tell him a joke." "Do not," said the owl, her feathers ruffling. "His humor is worse than his breath. I have heard him attempt a pun. It took 3 days for the echo to stop weeping."
Chapter 10 of The Dragon's Threshold, which was remarkably poorly insulated. The path ended at a sheer rock face, veiled by a curtain of cascading moss that looked like the beard of a very old and very unkempt god. Beneath the moss, barely visible, was a cleft, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through, provided that man had not eaten too much porridge that morning. Ivan measured himself against the opening, sucked in his stomach, and shimmied sideways, the hair slipping in behind him like a furry eel, the mouse clinging to his collar with the desperate tenacity of a sailor in a storm, and the owl folding her wings so tight that she resembled a feathered cigar. Inside, the air was dry and hot, smelling of sulfur, ancient dust, and something faintly metallic, the odor of old coins and older disappointments. The walls glowed faintly with veins of quartz, illuminating a vast cavern whose ceiling was lost in shadow. Stalactites hung like fossilized teeth, and the floor was littered with bones, not all of them animal, though Ivan made a point not to examine them too closely. In the center, coiled like a mountain of obsidian, lay the dragon. He was enormous, larger than Ivan had imagined, larger than any beast in any tale his grandmother had told him by the fire. His scales were black as pitch, absorbing the light and giving nothing back, like a hole in the world. From his shoulders sprouted 3 heads, each one startlingly different. One had the horns of a ram, curled and elegant, one the crest of a serpent, flat and venomous, and one was disturbingly human in its features, with cheekbones that could cut glass and a nose that belonged on a statue of a forgotten emperor. The human-like head opened its eyes first, a pale, intelligent blue, the color of glacier ice, and regarded Ivan with an expression of profound boredom, the kind of boredom that comes from having seen everything and having found all of it lacking. "Another one," it said, its voice smooth and tired, the voice of a man who has been forced to attend too many weddings. "Another hero come to rescue a maiden. Do you know how many heroes I have eaten? 147. Do you know how many maidens I have kept? 4. The rest were too boring to keep. They sang the same songs, cried the same tears, and had the same predictable opinions about the weather." Ivan stepped forward, keeping his voice steady, though his knees felt like they had been replaced with jelly. "I am not here to fight you. I am here to bargain." The serpent head snorted, releasing a puff of green smoke that smelled of rotten eggs and bad decisions. "Bargain? With us? We do not bargain. We make demands. We are the dragon. We are the terror of the skies, the scourge of the valleys, the—" "You are lonely," interrupted the ramhead, surprising everyone, including itself. It blinked and looked at its fellow heads with something like embarrassment. "What? It is true. We are bored. We are bored of terror. We are bored of gold. We are bored of maidens who cry all day and sing the same mournful songs about lost love and wilting flowers. We are bored of heroes who arrive with swords and speeches about honor. We have heard it all. We have eaten it all." The human head sighed heavily, the sigh of a creature that has been sighing for centuries and has become very good at it. Unfortunately, my brother is right. We are tired. So tell me, little blacksmith, what is your bargain? Make it interesting. If you bore us, I will eat you before you finish your first sentence. That is not a threat. That is a promise. Ivan drew a deep breath, feeling the mouse tremble against his neck, the hair press closer to his ankle, and the owl, bless her sarcastic heart, whisper into his ear, "Do not mention the weather. They are very sensitive about climate change." "I will fulfill 3 wishes," said Ivan, loud and clear. "Any 3 wishes you have. In return, you release Anushka unharmed, and you unmake your prison on the Vodyanoi. You will free him from his stone trap, and you will swear never to imprison another water spirit again. That is the deal." The 3 heads exchanged glances, a complex choreography of flickering eyes and twitching nostrils, a silent conversation that involved more eyebrow movement than a silent film. "3 wishes," said the human head slowly, tasting each word like a suspicious piece of meat. "And you will do anything?" "Anything within my power," said Ivan, with the confidence of a man who has already survived a swamp, a Leshy, and a talking squirrel, and therefore believes himself invincible. The ram head laughed, a bleating, hysterical sound that echoed off the cavern walls and startled a colony of bats into frantic flight. "We want a soup made from an axe, a soup so miraculous that it will cure our eternal boredom, and a bridge across the abyss of the lost, a bridge that does not touch water, for the Rusalki guard the depths, and they are terrible swimmers. And the 3rd wish," said the serpent head, its voice a dry hiss. "We will decide later, after we see what kind of man you truly are, after we see if you are worth the trouble." Ivan bowed, his back aching from all the bowing he had done in the past few days. "Agreed." The dragon uncoiled, rising to its full height, filling the cavern with its shadow, a shadow so dark that it seemed to drink the light from the quartz veins. Its 3 heads swayed like cobras, each one studying Ivan from a different angle. "Then begin, blacksmith," said the human head, settling back onto its rocky perch. "We have 1,000 years of boredom to undo, and you have exactly 3 days to entertain us. 3 days, or you become the 148th hero in our digestive tract. The clock is ticking, and believe me, we are very punctual when it comes to digestion." Chapter 11. Of the Axe Soup, which was not a metaphor. The dragon's cavern was not, as Ivan had expected, a gloomy pit of bones and despair. It was, in fact, rather cozy, if you ignored the piles of gold, mostly counterfeit, as he later discovered, stamped with the visage of a very unimpressed lizard, the scorch marks on the ceiling that formed a rather artistic rendition of a burning village, and the faint smell of singed maiden that lingered in the air like cheap perfume. The 3 heads had retreated to their respective perches, the ram head on a rocky ledge, where it had arranged a small collection of pebbles in what appeared to be a Zen garden. The serpent head coiled around a stalactite, its tongue flicking in and out with metronomic regularity, and the human head reclining on a cushion of moss like a decadent Roman emperor, complete with a crown of wilted laurel leaves. "So," said the human head, stretching its neck with a series of pops that sounded like breaking twigs. "The first wish. We desire a soup so miraculous that it will cure our eternal boredom. And it must be made from an axe. A wooden-handled axe, mind you. Iron is too common. We have eaten iron before. It tastes like regret and poor craftsmanship." Ivan suppressed a sigh. He had been expecting something of this nature. Dragons were notorious for their culinary absurdism, according to the owl, who had once attended a dragon dinner party and had been deeply unimpressed by the menu. He turned to his companions, the hare, who was nervously twitching its nose, the mouse, who had taken refuge in his collar and was squeaking softly, and the owl, who had perched on a nearby stalagmite and was grooming her feathers with studied indifference. "Right," said Ivan, rubbing his hands together. "We need a cauldron, water, and something to flavor the axe. Any suggestions?" The owl blinked slowly, the gesture of a creature who has been asked a question that is beneath her dignity. "There is a spring at the back of the cavern, water that has been filtered through quartz. It will do. The hare can fetch it in a gourd. I saw one lying near the entrance, left behind by some previous hero who clearly had no use for it. The mouse can gnaw some herbs from the walls. There is wormwood and wild garlic growing in the crevices, and also a rather aggressive strain of thyme that will try to strangle you if you are not careful. As for the axe," she looked pointedly at Ivan's belt. Ivan pulled out his grandfather's hatchet. It was a fine piece, with a blade that had split 1,000 logs and a handle that had been worn smooth by decades of use. He hesitated, running his thumb along the edge. "This is a family heirloom. My grandfather used it to build the house I was born in. My father used it to split the wood that warmed my childhood. This is not just a tool, it is a memory." "Your family heirloom will save your betrothed," said the owl, with the patience of a creature that has explained basic arithmetic to a child. "Priorities, blacksmith. You can mourn the hatchet later, after you have mourned the absence of your wife. Or you can mourn both at once, which is inefficient." He sighed and handed it over. The mouse, with surprising strength for its size, dragged the axe to the center of the cavern, where the hare had already set up a small stone cauldron, a hollowed-out boulder really, filled with the spring water that gurgled faintly from a crack in the wall. Ivan added the herbs, wormwood for bitterness, wild garlic for pungency, and a pinch of the salt Baba Yaga had given him, salt that glittered faintly as if it had been harvested from the tears of ancient seas. Then he began to recite the Zagovor Culinary, the culinary incantation he had memorized from Yaga's scroll, though he had to squint at the faded letters in the dim light. "By the fire of the first hearth, by the water of the first spring, let this iron become broth, let this wood become flesh. Let the eater find no hunger, but the taste of memory itself." The water began to bubble. The axe, still in the cauldron, began to soften, not melting, but transforming. Its edges blurred, its handle grew pliable, and soon the entire concoction was a rich golden stew, fragrant with the scent of roasted mushrooms, distant childhoods, and something that smelled suspiciously like freshly baked bread. The steam rose in spirals and formed the shape of a smiling face, which promptly winked and dissolved. The three heads leaned in, nostrils flaring in unison, a sight that was both comical and deeply unsettling. "It smells," said the ram head, its voice hushed with awe, "like my mother's nest. She used to make a soup from willow bark and moonlight. I have not smelled that in 700 years. "It smells like rain on a dry plain," said the serpent head, unexpectedly poetic. "It smells like the first spring after a long winter, when the snow melts and the world remembers how to be green." "It smells like nothing," said the human head, "and that is the most promising thing I have ever encountered. I have smelled everything: burning flesh, rotting gold, the breath of dying empires. Nothing is a new smell. I like it." Ivan ladled the soup into 3 hollowed-out skulls, the dragon's own tableware, which had once belonged to giants and were now used as bowls, and presented them with a flourish. The heads drank deeply, their throats working in unison, and for the first time in centuries, a look of something like peace crossed their faces. Their eyes glazed over, their jaws went slack, and they fell into a contented stupor, snoring softly in 3 different keys. Ivan seized the moment. He crept to the side of the cavern, where a small cage of woven coral, a delicate, almost beautiful structure, held a figure he recognized instantly. "Anushka," he whispered, pressing his face against the bars. She was thinner, paler, her cheeks hollowed and her hair tangled, but her eyes blazed with the same fire that had always burned in them, the fire of a woman who had never learned to be afraid. "Ivan, you absolute fool! You came! What are you doing? Do you have any idea how dangerous this is? They have 3 heads, and they all want different things for breakfast." "Making soup," he said, trying to pick the lock with the mouse's help. The tiny creature had already set to work on the coral with its razor-sharp incisors. "Keep your voice down. They are sleeping now, but it will not last. They are dragons. They have short attention spans and long memories." "It is a trick," she hissed, gripping the bars. "They always wake up hungry, and they will demand more. You have bought us an hour, maybe 2, and then they will ask for something even more ridiculous. What will you do then? Build them a cathedral out of toothpicks?" "I will improvise," said Ivan, as the lock clicked open with a soft snick. "I have been improvising since I left the village. It is the only skill that has never failed me." He pulled her out, and they embraced, a desperate, salt-streaked hug that smelled of river water, fear, and hope. For a moment, the world outside the cavern ceased to exist. There was only the warmth of her body against his, the beat of her heart against his chest, the soft sob that escaped her lips. They had just begun to tiptoe toward the exit, the hare leading the way, the mouse scouting ahead, the owl gliding in silent circles overhead, when the human head opened one eye. Just one, but it was enough. "Not so fast, little lovers," it murmured, its voice drowsy but distinctly amused. "The first wish is fulfilled. You have 2 more, and I must say, I am curious, very curious. You have bought my interest. That is not an easy thing to do. I have been bored for so long that I had forgotten what curiosity felt like. Now, for the second wish, build me a bridge across the abyss of the lost. A bridge that does not touch water, for the Rusalki guard the depths, and they are very territorial about their swimming lanes. And you have until dawn. The sun rises at 7. I checked. Ivan looked at Anushka, at the owl, at the hare and mouse, his unlikely, absurd, invaluable companions. A bridge that does not touch water, he repeated, his voice flat. What am I, an engineer? I am a blacksmith. I make horseshoes and plowshares. I fix kettles. I do not build suspension bridges. You are a blacksmith, said the owl dryly, her amber eyes glinting. Improvise. That is what you do, is it not? Improvise. And if you fail, we will all be eaten. The stakes are high, but the pressure is nothing new. You have survived a swamp. You have survived a Leshy. You have survived the Grebe. You can survive a bridge. Ivan sighed, the sigh of a man who has been handed a task that is simultaneously impossible and inevitable. Fine, but I am going to need a lot of rope and some very strong opinions about architecture. Chapter 12. Of the Bridge over the Abyss, which was a masterpiece of incompetence. The abyss of the lost was not a river in the usual sense. It was a chasm filled with a liquid so dark that it seemed to swallow light itself, a substance that the Vodyanoi had once called the tears of forgotten gods, though he had also admitted that he made that up on the spot because it sounded poetic. On its surface, pale faces occasionally surfaced, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with eternal surprise, then sank back into the void, leaving only ripples that spread like whispers. Ivan stood at the edge, the hare nervously hopping from foot to foot, the mouse peeking out from Anushka's braids, and Anushka herself, now free, now fierce, staring at the abyss with a mixture of terror and contempt. We need beams, said Ivan, pacing. But there is no wood here, only stone and that black stuff. And we cannot touch the water. The Rusalki will drag us down. They have been waiting for centuries to add more souls to their collection. There is wood, said the owl, circling above. There, those petrified trees along the cliff. They have been turned to stone by the dragon's breath, but they are still wood underneath all that rock. You would need to unstone them, and for that you need a spell. Ivan pulled out the scroll, now somewhat crumpled and stained with axe soup, and squinted at the faded letters. He found the Zagovor Raskovivanya, the unpetrification chant. It required the heart of a living thing as a catalyst. The hare, sensing danger, backed away with the speed of a creature that had survived many close calls. I am not sacrificing my companions, said Ivan firmly, crossing his arms. We have been through too much together. I would rather fall into the abyss than cook a hare for a bridge. Then use your own blood, said the owl, with the pragmatism of a creature that has never been sentimental about bodily fluids. A few drops, it will suffice. You are a living thing, barely, but technically. Ivan cut his palm with a flake of obsidian. It stung, but he had suffered worse, and let the blood drip onto the first petrified tree. He recited the chant, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hand. The tree groaned, its stone bark cracking like ice in spring, and slowly, miraculously, it turned back to living wood. The transformation was not instant. It took a full minute of groaning and splitting, during which Ivan feared the whole cliff would collapse. But eventually, a massive pine log lay at his feet, fresh and fragrant. He repeated the process for 7 more trees, each one taking longer than the last, until his hand was smeared with blood and his voice was hoarse from chanting. But they had a pile of timber, 8 massive logs, each as long as 3 men. But how to span the abyss without touching the water? The mouse squeaked a suggestion. It had been thinking while the others were busy, and its tiny brain had come up with something surprisingly elegant. We can suspend the beams from the cliff walls. Use the vines that grow along the edges. They are strong. They have been growing for 1,000 years, and they are tougher than any rope. The Rusalki cannot reach them because they hang too high. Ivan nodded. He tied ropes of braided vine to the beams, threw them across with the help of the hare's incredible speed. The creature had become a blur of brown fur, shuttling back and forth with smaller branches, and anchored them into crevices on the opposite side. The hare, with its spring-loaded legs, made the journey in seconds, returning with messages scratched into the rock. Secure, and loose, and watch your step. The owl directed from above, her voice a constant stream of criticism and advice. No, not that beam. It is too crooked. Are you trying to build a bridge or a drunken snake? Move it 3 inches to the left. Your left. Yes, that is better. Now tie that knot again. It looks like a cat's breakfast. Anushka, free from her cage, proved invaluable. She had woven enough linen in her life to know a good knot when she saw one, and she had a way of tying ropes that would make a sailor weep with envy. Her fingers moved with the speed and precision of a lifetime of practice, and soon the bridge began to take shape. By dawn, the sun had begun to creep over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised peach. The bridge stood complete. It was a precarious, swinging contraption of wood and vine, hovering a full foot above the abyss. It did not touch the water. The Rusalki below could only gnash their teeth in frustration, their pale faces surfacing to hiss at the bridge like cats at a closed door. The dragon's human head emerged from the cavern. The other 2 heads were still snoring, having been less interested in the construction, and surveyed the bridge with a critical eye. He walked across it, testing each plank with a heavy step, and when he reached the other side, he nodded slowly, his glacier blue eyes unreadable. "Adequate," he said. "It wobbles, but it does not collapse. It is ugly, but it functions. You have passed the 2nd test. I am impressed, though I do not show it, because I am a dragon, and we are constitutionally incapable of sincere praise. Now, for the 3rd and final wish." The 3 heads spoke in unison. The ram head had woken up, and the serpent head had uncoiled from its stalactite, their voices blending into a single, resonant command that echoed off the cavern walls and rattled the bones on the floor. "We wish to see the future.
We wish to know if we will ever achieve true immortality. Bring us the mirror of tomorrows. It lies in the heart of the crystal cave, beyond the swamp, beyond the birch grove, beyond the very concept of now. Bring it to us, and we will release your Anushka. But know this, the mirror shows not what will be, but what might be, and some futures are better left unseen. We have been waiting 1,000 years to see ours. We trust you will not disappoint. Ivan looked at Anushka. She looked back at him. In her eyes he saw the same question that was in his heart. What if the future is worse than the present? What if we are not meant to see it? But he had come this far. He was not about to stop now. Of the crystal cave, which was not a cave at all, but a very rude metaphor. The crystal cave was not a cave at all. It was a space that existed between moments, a fold in time where past, present, and future mingled like old friends at a tavern who have had too much vodka and are beginning to repeat themselves. Ivan entered through a crack in the rock that he had not noticed before. It had simply appeared like a wink from the universe, guided by the owl's keen eyes and the hare's nervous twitching, which had become a reliable barometer of imminent danger. Inside, the walls were made of a translucent mineral that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, like a heartbeat, or, as Anushka observed, like the lighting in a very expensive restaurant that wants you to feel calm while they overcharge you for soup. The air was cold and still, and every sound echoed for longer than it should, as if the cave itself were repeating everything back just to make sure it had heard correctly. In the center, on a pedestal of pure obsidian, so black that it seemed to absorb the very concept of light, rested a mirror. Not a mirror of glass, but of water, held in place by invisible forces, its surface rippling like a pond disturbed by a single drop. And in its depths Ivan could see fragments, a village burning, a child laughing, a dragon weeping, a woman in a white dress, a city of glass and steel, a phone that glowed in the dark. He approached slowly, his boots making no sound on the crystalline floor. The owl perched on his shoulder, her voice low and uncharacteristically serious. "Touch it, and you will be drawn into the future," she said. "You will see not just the dragon's fate, but your own. And you will have only a single chance to return. The mirror does not give second chances. It is not a forgiving piece of furniture." Ivan turned to Anushka. She stood behind him, her hand on his arm, her fingers cold and trembling. "Ivan, you do not have to do this. We can find another way. We can run. We can hide. We can start a new life somewhere far away, where dragons do not exist and mirrors are just mirrors." "There is no other way," said Ivan, his voice gentle but firm. "We have come too far. And besides, I am curious. I want to see if the future is as ridiculous as the present." Anushka laughed, a sound that was half sob, half genuine amusement. "You are impossible. You know that?" "I have been told," said Ivan, and he touched the surface of the water mirror. The world tilted, spun, dissolved. Chapter 14 of The City of Glass and Steel,
where no one had time for dragons. He found himself standing in a city that had no sky, only a pale, hazy ceiling of smog and cloud, through which the sun struggled to penetrate like a prisoner trying to escape. The buildings were towers of glass and steel, so tall that they seemed to pierce the heavens, though Ivan suspected the heavens had long since moved elsewhere. The streets were filled with roaring metal beasts, cars, as he would later learn, that moved with the aggressive impatience of creatures who had forgotten how to walk. People rushed past him in strange garments, suits and dresses that looked like they had been designed by someone who had never worn clothes for comfort. They spoke a language that was almost familiar, but not quite, peppered with words like deadline, synergy, and quarterly report, words that made Ivan's head spin. He stood in a courtyard, clutching his hatchet, though it had transformed somehow into a smaller, less impressive version of itself, like a weapon that had been put on a diet. His companions had become ordinary animals. The hare was a gray rabbit, the mouse was a field mouse, and the owl, bless her, was still an owl, though she had shrunk slightly and now looked like she had just woken up from a very bad nap. "Where are we?" squeaked the mouse, its tiny nose twitching at the acrid air. "Moscow," said the owl, who had somehow maintained her dignity and her ability to sound superior. "Year 2026, the future, and there," she gestured with a wing, "there is your answer." Ivan looked where she indicated, on a bench under a sickly tree that had been planted in a square of concrete, a tree that looked as miserable as a prisoner on death row, sat a woman who was the spitting image of Anushka. But this Anushka wore a sharp, dark suit, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she was tapping furiously at a glowing device in her palm, a device that seemed to absorb her attention the way the Rusalki's song had absorbed the real Anushka. She was arguing with someone on the device, her voice sharp and exasperated, the voice of a woman who has been asked one too many stupid questions. "No, I told you, the quarterly reports are not in the cloud. They are in the physical files, because some of us remember that the cloud is just other people's computers. Yes, I know the cloud is more efficient. I also know that efficiency is not a moral value. Goodbye." She snapped the device shut, or rather, pressed a button and shoved it into her pocket, and sighed heavily, rubbing her temples. Ivan approached, his heart hammering against his ribs like a bird against a cage. "Anushka?" She looked up, startled, then squinted at him with the suspicion of a woman who has been approached by too many strangers on the street. "Who are you, and why are you dressed like a peasant from a historical reenactment? Is this some kind of guerrilla marketing for a new show? Because I am not interested." "It is me, Ivan, your betrothed." She laughed, a short, brittle sound, like glass breaking. "Ivan? I do not have a betrothed. I have a cat, a mortgage, and a boss who thinks Synergy is a breakfast cereal. You have got the wrong person. Try the next bench. There is always someone who needs saving." But as he looked closer, Ivan saw it. The same scar on her chin, the same fire in her eyes, the same way she tilted her head when she was being difficult. This was her, or a version of her, hardened by a world that had no use for romance, no use for rivers, no use for love that did not come with a contract. "I need your help," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I need a piece of your soul, just a spark of the purest part of you, to save a dragon, to save a world, to save a river that is more than just water." She stared at him. For a long moment, the noise of the city faded, the roaring beasts grew silent, and the smog seemed to part, revealing a sliver of blue sky. Something flickered in her gaze, a memory, perhaps, of a different life, a life she had never lived but somehow remembered. "You know what?" she said, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "I think I have seen you before, in dreams. We were by a river, a black river with willows. I was washing clothes, you were watching me, and I felt safe." "Yes," said Ivan, his voice cracking with hope. "That is us. That is the river Smaragdina. Please, just a drop of your kindness, just a memory of that dream." She sighed, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a handkerchief, plain white linen, edged with blue thread that looked like it had been stitched by a grandmother's hand. "This was my grandmother's. It is the only pure thing I have left. Everything else has been processed, packaged, and sold. Take it, and if you ever find a way to make that river real again, come find me." Ivan took the handkerchief. It was warm in his hand, alive with the memory of another time, another world. The future Anushka smiled, a sad, tired smile, and turned away, already reaching for her glowing device. "Wait," said Ivan. "Do you ever find happiness in this future?" She paused, her hand hovering over the screen. "Happiness is not a place you arrive at," she said. "It is a soup you keep stirring. I am still stirring, but that handkerchief, that is the recipe." And the world spun once more. Chapter 15. Of Return and Revelation, which was surprisingly anticlimactic. Ivan materialized back in the crystal cave, the handkerchief clutched in his hand, his companions reappearing around him in a shower of silver sparks. The mirror of tomorrows flickered once, twice, then went dark, its surface becoming solid, unyielding stone, as if it had given up on the future altogether. The owl flew down, peering at the handkerchief with the critical eye of a creature who has seen too many magical artifacts to be impressed. "That is not a soul. That is a piece of fabric. It has been washed so many times that it is practically transparent. But it is soaked in her essence, her kindness, her memory, her stubborn refusal to give up even in a world of glass and deadlines. It may be enough to trick the dragon, or it may not. We are about to find out." Ivan nodded, stuffing the handkerchief into his pocket. "Let us go. I have had enough of the future. It is too loud, too fast, and everyone is very stressed about things that do not matter." They hurried back through the time fold, emerging into the cavern to find the dragon waiting, its 3 heads swaying with barely concealed anticipation. The ram head was practically vibrating with excitement. The serpent head was hissing softly, its tongue flicking in and out, and the human head was leaning forward, its glacier blue eyes fixed on Ivan with an intensity that made his skin crawl. "Did you find it?" asked the human head. "Did you see our future?" Did you see whether we achieve true immortality? Did you see us as gods, worshipped by mortals, our names spoken in the same breath as thunder and fire? Yes, said Ivan, holding up the handkerchief. I saw it, and I brought you the pure energy you seek, the energy of a soul that remained untainted even in a world of steel and noise. It is not a soul, technically speaking. It is a handkerchief. But it has more soul than most people I met in the future. He dipped the handkerchief into the pool of water that had formed near the cauldron, the remnants of the axe soup now cold and congealed, and approached the dragon. Hold still. This might tingle, or it might burn. I am not sure. The instructions were vague. He sprinkled the water onto the dragon's scales. The drops sizzled, steamed, and then nothing. The dragon did not change. It remained as large, as scaly, as three-headed and terrifying as ever. For a moment, Ivan's heart plummeted into his stomach. But then the human head began to laugh. It was not a mocking laugh, or a triumphant laugh, or even a sarcastic laugh. It was a deep, rolling, genuine laugh that shook the entire cavern, sending stalactites trembling and loose bones rattling across the floor. The ram head joined in, its bleating cackle mixing with the serpent's dry hiss, and soon all three heads were laughing so hard that tears, actual, genuine tears, streamed down their scaly cheeks. "You fool," said the human head, wiping its eyes with a claw that could have crushed granite. "You magnificent, impossible fool. I did not want immortality. I wanted proof. Proof that I could still be moved, still be surprised, still be human in some small, pathetic way. And you gave me that. You showed me a future where even in that gray, soulless world, my Anushka, the soul you found, still remembered a river, still remembered love, still remembered to be kind, even to a strange man in strange clothes who asked for a piece of her soul." The dragon's scales shimmered, not with magic, but with something that looked suspiciously like relief, and it began to shrink, folding in on itself like a collapsing tent, its three heads merging into one, its massive body contracting until it was no larger than a man. And standing before Ivan was a weary, ancient figure, a man with three faces, each one wise, tired, and strangely gentle. He wore a rumpled suit that looked like it had been slept in, and he carried a briefcase that was held together with duct tape. "Take your Anushka," he said, his voice now soft and human. "Take her and go. I have kept her long enough, longer than I should have. And take this lesson. True immortality is not living forever. It is being remembered. And I will remember you, Ivan the blacksmith, as the one who brought me a handkerchief and a hope. Also, a very good soup. That soup was excellent. I will be thinking about it for centuries." Ivan bowed. "What will you do now?" The dragon man shrugged. "I hear Moscow is nice this time of year. I have always wanted to try being a life coach. 3 heads, 3 perspectives, very marketable. I will write a book, How to Roar Without Burning Out. My seminars will be legendary. But first, I need a new suit. This one is ruined." And he walked out of the cavern, past Ivan and Annushka, past the hare and the mouse and the owl, into the dawn light, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like the Rusalki's song. Chapter 16. Of the wedding at Smaragdina, which was not a simple affair. The village of Glukhovo had never seen a wedding like it. The river Smaragdina, now calm and almost friendly, though it still burped occasionally, as if digesting a bad memory, reflected the bright banners strung between the houses. The banners had been woven by Annushka herself, using the blue thread from the handkerchief of her future self, and they fluttered in the breeze like prayers. The Vodinoi showed up, albeit disguised as a fat merchant with a suspiciously green complexion, and drank 3 barrels of kvass before sinking into a happy stupor. The Leshy sent a gift of wild berries. They were slightly poisonous, but only if you ate more than a dozen, and the guests had been warned. The squirrel Shetinka arrived with a tiny silver tiara for the bride, which she had carved from a nut and polished with moonlight. The talking mushrooms sent a bouquet of fungi that sang hymns in 4-part harmony. They were slightly off-key, but no one had the heart to tell them. Ivan wore his grandfather's tunic, patched and proud, with the bone whistle, the Vodinoi's gift, hanging around his neck like a talisman. Annushka wore a white dress that her mother had woven before she died, embroidered with the same blue thread as the handkerchief from her future self. She looked like a bride from a painting, or a dream, or both. The owl officiated, her voice dry and commanding as she recited the old vows, the ones that had been spoken since before the Slavs, since before the rivers had names, since before dragons had learned to be bored. Do you, Ivan, take Annushka to be your water and your well, to be your fire and your hearth, to be the riddle you never stop solving? I do, said Ivan, his voice steady. And do you, Annushka, take Ivan to be your earth and your sky, to be the bridge across your abyss, to be the soup you keep stirring every day? I do, said Annushka, and she smiled, a smile that could have melted glaciers. Then kiss, said the owl, and let the river sing. They kissed, and the river did indeed sing, a low, melodic hum that rose from the depths, a sound that was older than music, older than words. The Rusalki, for once, were silent, their pale faces bobbing just below the surface, watching with something that might have been envy, or might have been hope. Chapter 17. Of the gift of the second mirror, which arrived without warning. A year passed. Borislav, their son, grew strong and curious. He had his father's shoulders and his mother's temper, and he had already learned to ask questions that made adults uncomfortable. But Ivan could not shake the memory of the future he had seen, the glass towers, the roaring metal beasts, the Annushka in a sharp suit who had forgotten the river. He often wondered, was that a warning or a promise? Was the future fixed, or was it as flexible as a willow branch? One night, as the full moon hung over the lake like a silver coin, the mirror of tomorrows appeared unbidden in their hut. It floated above the stove, shimmering like heat haze, and from its surface stepped a figure, not a monster, not a ghost, but a woman in a crisp blazer, holding a tablet and looking mildly annoyed. "Do not scream," she said in a voice that was crisp yet familiar. "I am you, from 2026, and I am here to thank you." Annushka, the village one, stared, her mouth agape. "Thank me? For what? For stealing your handkerchief?" "For giving me a memory," said the future Annushka, tapping her tablet,
which glowed with an image of the river Smaragdina, dark, patient, and mocking. I was drowning in quarterly reports and office politics. My life was a series of meetings and emails and caffeine-induced panic. But that day, when a strange peasant with a hatchet asked me for a handkerchief, I felt something crack open. I started dreaming of willows and black water. I quit my job. I went to the countryside. I found a river just like Smaragdina, and I have been happy ever since. I am a beekeeper now. I have a small house. I have a cat. He is very fat and very demanding. Ivan stepped forward, his brow furrowed. But that means the future can change? The handkerchief was not just a souvenir. It was a seed you planted in your own past.
Precisely, said future Anushka. Your journey did not just save me here, it saved me there. Because love is not a single event. It is a thread that weaves through all possible worlds. You pulled on one end, and the whole tapestry shifted. I am not saying I fully understand the physics of it. I was an accountant, not a physicist. But I know what I feel, and what I feel is grateful. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver device, a smartphone, sleek and glowing, the kind of thing that Ivan had seen in the future city and had found deeply unsettling. Take this, she said, handing it to him. It is a second mirror, a window into the future that you can open any time. But use it wisely. It shows not what will be, but what could be, based on your choices now. It is like a very judgmental compass. It will tell you if you are going in the right direction, but it will also judge your fashion choices. Ivan held the phone as if it were a live coal. And what about the dragon? What happened to him? Future Anushka smiled, a warm, genuine smile that made her look almost like the Anushka he had married. He is fine. He became a life coach in Moscow. 3 heads, 3 perspectives, very popular with the corporate crowd. He even wrote a book, How to Roar Without Burning Out. It was a bestseller. He also has a podcast. He is annoyingly successful, but he still sends me postcards. With a wink, she stepped back into the mirror, which dissolved into a shower of silver dust that settled on the floor like powdered moonlight. Ivan and Anushka, the village one, stared at each other, then at the phone. It buzzed. A text message appeared. The future is not a place you arrive at. It is a soup you keep stirring. Now go to bed, you two, and stop staring at screens. It is bad for your eyes and your soul. Chapter 18 Of the Last Bridge, which was not a bridge at all. Ivan never used the phone to peek into the future again. He kept it in a drawer, wrapped in the handkerchief, as a reminder that every choice matters, but no choice is final. He and Anushka raised Borislav with tales of talking mushrooms, sarcastic owls, and a dragon who had found peace in spreadsheets and life coaching. Years later, when Borislav was old enough to ask, "Father, what is the meaning of all your adventures?" Ivan sat him down by the river, the same river where it had all begun, and said, "Son, the meaning is this. There is no happily ever after. There is only happily now." The dragon wanted to live forever, but he was already dead inside. He just did not know it. The Rusalki wanted to drown love, but they only drowned themselves. Baba Yaga gave me a mouse, a hare, and an owl, not because I was strong, but because I was willing to be silly enough to accept them. And your mother, he glanced at Anushka, who was pretending to stir a pot, but actually listening, her ear cocked like a cat's. Your mother was never a prize to be won. She was a person to be chosen every single day. Even on the days when she is cranky, those days count the most. Borislav nodded slowly, his young face serious. So the real magic is ordinary? No, said Ivan, grinning. The real magic is that the ordinary is never ordinary. A cup of tea, a hand to hold, a river that still flows. Those are the things that outlast any dragon. And if you ever forget, just look at that phone in the drawer. It will show you 1,000 futures, but only one will have your mother laughing. That is the one worth choosing. Then he threw a pebble into the water, and the ripples carried his words all the way to the Lake of the Forgotten, where the Vodyanoi, now a very happy and very retired water spirit, sat on his stone, playing solitaire and humming the Rusalki's song. Epilogue of The Last Word, or What the Owl Saw When No One Was Looking. 20 years later, the village of Glukhovo now had actual plumbing, a miracle that Baba Yaga, now retired from active witchcraft and running a popular blog called Hut and Hearth, had described as a triumph of human stubbornness over nature's indifference. There was also a single street lamp that flickered only on holidays, which the villagers considered a great improvement over total darkness. The owl sat on the ridge of the hut, her feathers grayer now, her eyes still sharp as winter flint. Below her, the river Smaragdina flowed as it always had, dark, patient, and slightly mocking, as if it knew secrets it would never tell. On its bank, Ivan, now with a beard streaked with white and a slight stoop in his shoulders, was teaching his grandson how to skip stones. Anushka, still quick-tongued and formidable, shelled peas on the porch and occasionally threw one at Ivan's head when he got the skip count wrong. Borislav, their son, had grown into a man who inherited his father's shoulders and his mother's temper. He had married a girl from the next village, not because she was a damsel in distress, but because she could out-argue him in 3 dialects, and once wrestled a runaway pig to the ground. Their daughter Marfa was already asking questions like, "Why does the moon follow us?" and "Can I be a dragon when I grow up?" Questions that Ivan answered with the patience of a man who had learned that there are no wrong questions, only wrong answers. The phone from the future sat in a drawer, wrapped in the handkerchief. It had not buzzed in years. Ivan had checked it only once, on a particularly dark winter night, and had seen a vision of himself, old and content, surrounded by grandchildren. He had smiled, closed the drawer, and never opened it again. Some futures are better lived than watched. The dragon, now a cheerful, slightly eccentric old man with 3 distinctly different personalities, each of which wore a different hat to keep them separate, had indeed become a life coach in Moscow. His seminars were wildly popular, though he sometimes confused synergy with sorcery, and once accidentally turned a boardroom into a birch grove. He still sent Ivan a postcard every New Year, always signed with a tiny drawing of a 3-headed salamander. Baba Yaga had retired from active witchcraft and now ran a popular blog called Hut and Hearth, offering advice on herbal remedies and passive-aggressive spellcasting. Her most read post, "How to Make Your Enemies Think They've Won, while you actually have." The Vojanoi had finally learned to use a smartphone and spent his days sending aggressively cheerful selfies from the bottom of the lake. The Rusalki had formed a choir and occasionally performed at village weddings, for a fee, payable in fish. One evening, as the sun bled orange into the horizon and the street lamp flickered to life, a full hour before it was supposed to, Ivan sat down with his grandson and pulled out the bone whistle the Vojanoi had given him. "Grandfather," said the boy, "will you tell me the story of the dragon again?" Ivan smiled, blew a single soft note on the whistle, and the river rippled in response. A gentle, almost affectionate ripple, like a cat purring. "Not tonight, little one," he said. "Tonight I will tell you a different story. A story about a man who did not need a sword, or a spell, or a bridge. He just needed to remember that love is not a destination. It is the road you walk, the mud you squelch through, the mushrooms that judge you, and the omelet you make from the axe afterwards. And it is also the river that listens, even when you think it is not paying attention." The boy frowned. "That is a strange story." "It is the real story," said Anushka, appearing behind them with a plate of fresh bread. The same bread she had been baking for 50 years, the same recipe her grandmother had taught her, the same smell that had greeted Ivan every morning of his married life. And it has a happy ending, not because everything worked out, but because everything keeps working out, every single day, as long as you keep choosing it, even when it is difficult, especially when it is difficult. She handed Ivan a slice, and he bit into it with the satisfaction of a man who had conquered dragons and still got the last word. The bread was warm, the butter was fresh, and the river hummed its ancient, sleepy song. The owl from her perch hooted once, dry, sardonic, but not unkind. "And so," she said, "the tale ends where it began, by the river, with a fool who loved a fool, and a world that somehow made sense of all of it. If you believe that, you have learned nothing. If you do not, you have learned everything. Also, someone really needs to turn off that ridiculous street lamp. It is ruining the mood." She fluffed her feathers and added, as an afterthought, "And tell your mother, the future one, that the bee business is a good choice. I always thought she had the temperament for it. Bees are just flying mushrooms, and mushrooms are just silent, opinionated vegetables."
P.S. The Rusalki's choir album, Songs of the Soggy Heart, is available on all streaming platforms. Proceeds go to the preservation of mystical wetlands. The Vordyanoi has a podcast now. It is called Drowning in Thought. It is exactly as pretentious as it sounds. P.S. The Dragon's Book, How to Roar Without Burning Out, is also available. The audiobook is narrated by all three heads. It is confusing, but very motivational. P.S. Baba Yaga's blog, Hut and Hearth, has a new post. How to make a soup from an axe and impress your in-laws. It has gone viral. She is very pleased with herself. The Slavic Dragon's Tapestry of Love, a novel of threads, thorns, and thousand-year boredom. Copyright 2026 by Anna Gogoleva. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopy, recording, scanning, or otherwise, except for brief quotations in critical reviews and articles without the prior written permission of the author. Publisher, Anna Gogoleva. Cover design, Anna Gogoleva. Interior design, Anna Gogoleva.